Processing related information already we discussed in architecture at the beginning itself. Anyhow, just to recollect all those things, I'll just give you the flow of that execution, how it happens. So when a user connects to the database, there is a session created. Every session will have a unique identification. We call it as session ID. And within the session, user performs transactions. And each of those transactions will have a unique identification called transaction ID. But remember that the transaction IDs will be unique within the session. So they are unique within the session, but not globally unique. But in case if your transaction is consisting of any data changing commands, then that will also have another ID called update transaction ID, which is unique within the system. It's unique within the system. So then when you're speaking about transaction is basically uh, a set of commands or collection of commands, and those commands when it comes to execution will be split up into threads for parallel processing, and those threads will be processed by logical CPU cores. So with that, if you see the processing perspective, how the CPU will be processing your request. But then when it comes to the processing of these requests, what actually system does is when a command comes for execution, it doesn't execute the command directly. Before executing the command, first it will prepare a plan, execution plan, what we call it as, and those execution plans will be stored in the plan cache, SQL plan cache, so that in case if any other person is trying to execute the same command, system doesn't need to prepare the plan. It can save the time for preparing the plan and can just fetch the plan from the plan cache like that. So this all processing is taking place in HANA database, as we know that. These all things what you can see. The session is having that ID. You can find the complete details about how many sessions are there, how many are active, how many are idle, what transactions taking place within the session, how the processing is happening. Everything you can find out. And even we can go to an extent of identifying which threads are processing your request. Like if you look at this diagram, so you can understand that if it's a simple statement coming from OLTP systems, and that will be processed by SQL executor thread which is assigned to your session. Whereas in case if it's a complex statement coming from OLAP system, SQL executor thread doesn't process it. Instead of that, it will delegate that work to job worker threads. So the job executor will assign that work to job worker threads for the parallel processing purpose. So that's how the work distribution happens and the performance improvement takes place. So those things you'll be able to see here if you go to the performance tab. And you can see here sessions, and you have all that summarized information here. How many sessions we have, which database users, which application users are connected, all that you can find it out here. What is that application they are using also we can see. In case some applications are running, it will show you even that ABAP application also clearly. How many are running, how many are idle. Only one is running, the remaining 5 are idle here. You can see this one is running. And it will give you information like which user has connected, what is the status of the transaction, those details also. So application, version of the application, application user. Application user means even operating system users will be considered as application users. And the database user, from which client host they have connected, IP address of that. So how many queries they have executed, how many DML statements, DDL statements they executed, everything you find in this, complete details. Network traffics also they'll show you. So if you want further details, like in this particular session, what is happening, as I told you, every session is having a unique identification called session ID or logical connection ID. This is a logical connection ID. You just right click on that and click on navigate, go to threads. So it will show you the threads here. You can see job executors, SQL executor and job worker threads. So those level of processing details also you can find. If any transaction is blocked because someone else is trying to update the same data, those blocker transactions also you can find here. And as I did mention, that system will generate a plan which we call it as execution plans. All those execution plans are saved here in this plan cache. And you have an option to analyze these plans in the plan cache. Advanced options you have. I'll show you a small example here. Try to understand it. I'm writing one SQL statement. And let us see whether the system is preparing a plan for that or not. So like this one simple SQL statement. I'm just using a subquery also. So I'm executing this. So it will show you that it's executed in 40 milliseconds, 608 microseconds. Plan preparation and all that is done. So that if you want to look at, if you just go to this SQL plan cache, you should find that. See here, this one. And showing every single detail about that execution, what we did now. Which user has done that, how many objects are accessed, what are those tables accessed, which location we have those tables, row store or column store, what's the time taken for that, duration, maximum execution time, minimum execution time, average execution time, if the same is repeated number of times. So all the details you'll find, number of rows we fetched finally, complete details including the timestamps and all. So when you want to perform analysis like this, what you do is just right click on this, navigate, there is an option, not navigate, visualize plan here. So that plan visualization you can do from here, otherwise Even when you go to the console, if you click on the prepare in the console, it will show you in the console. Right click here. There's an option for you here to visualize the plan, execute. Simple explain plan option is there, but it's a simple explanation it will give you. The steps involved there. Subqueries execution and all that it will show you. But you want to have detailed analysis of this, the detailed analysis. So then what you do is right click here, visualize, execute. Now actually the perspective itself will change. This we call it as plan visualizer. This perspective is called a plan visualizer. So here it will show you the plan. Overview information is shown here. First overview information, and you can have detailed plan explanations also. So here it's only overview information. You can see what is the compilation time, execution time, what are the major operators we have, dominant operators we call them as. Whether your execution is happening on single node or multi-nodes. If it's multi-node, network transfers you have. So what is that query and system on which it's executing, version, memory allocated for that, number of tables used. If you click on this, it will take you to the tables. The total result count you have also will be shown. And it gives such a detailed information here. If you go a little bit down here, including the timelines it will give. See, it's showing 0 to 20 milliseconds what happened, 20 to 40 milliseconds what happened. You select the respective area, detailed execution plans are stored, shown here. Operator list they are giving, tables they are giving, anything network if you have that also will be shown. So SAP is giving options to you. It's all about how you analyze it. So that analytical capabilities also we have here. So they are providing even yesterday as I shown you the load monitoring, we also call it as performance monitoring about your processor usage. So here we can select your CPU usages and you can monitor that, which is also available in your HANA cockpit, this information. And let us see this in HANA cockpit, how it looks like. Same information will be there, better presentations they have there, that's it. Okay, there's a small connection issue. So let us go to this HANA cockpit and see how it it looks like. Use that cockpit admin. Just a minute, I'll connect to another network. Okay. So let us go to our database. So here, all that information you have, whatever I mentioned there, like overall database status, they are giving alerts, they are giving memory usage, CPU usages, you can see from here also, which I shown you yesterday. We have sessions here, how many active sessions, how many total sessions we have. Those details you can find. Running active sessions, how many you have, you can find out. So sometimes you want to cancel those sessions, you have those options also, you can look at these options. And then you also have the threads information given to you. Actually, these threads was not there in the previous versions of Cockpit. So you can find the thread details, any statements being executed, those can be monitored. So these are the threads. Any of the thread operations you want to cancel for any reasons, you can do that. You have that flexibility. So any statements are executed, we can monitor those statements. Any long running statements you have, you can see. It's like blocker transactions, what we call them as. So plan caches analysis also you can do. This is another thing, new thing which SAP has introduced in 2.0. OpenSQL plan cache. You can just click on plan cache and so analyze the plan caches here. These are all SQL statements. So you can see those statements executed. So a lot of times that is used to see here. This is what the statement we executed now. multiple times. But we don't have anything like Plan Visualizer, which you see in your HANA Studio. That's exclusive to HANA Studio. It's not available in Cockpit. Okay, so that's related to your processor processing. And sometimes expensive statements you want to find out, you can trace them. But on what basis you decide whether the statement is expensive or not, that question comes. So statements, whether they're expensive or not, you decide purely based on the time taken. So if you know the maximum execution time, you want to set that as a limit. If it crosses that limit, then you call it as expensive statement. You can configure the traces for that. So once you configure the trace, it's taking more time, it will show you automatically that expensive statement here. So here you can enable that. Like this, you can apply filters. Any particular table on which you are executing the statements, that also you can specify. Any applications and all that you can give. And once you set this trace, when that statement is executed, if it takes more time, automatically that will be shown in that expensive statement. That is shown as expensive statement because it has taken more time than what we specified in that activation of the trace, like that. So don't keep traces running for a long period. You once your work is done, you deactivate them immediately. So you have those processor details here, and then disk usages also you can find, which will take you to the volumes tab. Here you can see data volumes, log volumes, trace volumes, paths, or service wise. Also we can see index server, name server, what are the files being used, data files, log files, everything will be shown here. And always keep an eye on that usages and the IO statistics also. Sometimes your disk blocks are corrupted, that is giving some issues. Any blocked uh, informations you have, the blockages you have, all that will be shown here. So that may lead to some performance issues sometimes that you can address. So you can comply to that storage solutions provided about that. So alerts, as I mentioned already yesterday, you can do configurations, and there's also an option for you to specify emailing. So you can configure emails. Whenever the alert comes, that should be sent to a specific person. Or also you can have even advanced things like if disk related problems should be sent to this email. Also related to another person, like that. So those configurations you can do here. You need to specify SMTP server details, center information, and click on modify recipients and add the recipients here. And here's for specific checks like disk problems. I want to send to selected people. I can just add recipients only for disk usage issues, like that. Threshold values you can change here. So this can also be done from your HANA Studio, HANA Cockpit. If you want to do it from HANA Cockpit, here we have configuring alerts. Displaying alerts, anyhow at the top they are doing it. Configuring alerts, if you go to, so they'll show you the complete details about that alert. General information comes under which category, memory or processor. on schedule or not. Email recipients. Anything you want to change properties, on the right bottom corner edit button is there. Click on that and change these values if you want. If I say restore default, these are the default values. Email and all that you can give. So delta merge configurations when it's happening. So if delta merge is not active, it leads to issues. Every 10 minutes delta merge is happening. Because you know that column store tables are having two storages, delta and main. Delta should be merged into the main so that you'll get the right kind of performances. So in case if it's not active, that leads to performance issues. So you need to make it sure that that's active in parameters, configuration parameters. Example, here you take that memory usage is switched off. So that you want to switch on, you can switch on this. Because I did it intentional. I don't want to check the memory in my system every time, every 1 minute. That's why I switched off it. So those kind of configuration settings also you can perform. Parameters, you know, system information already are given to you. So diagnosis information, depending on the kind of traces activated, diagnosis files or trace files will be generated. All the log files, trace files are available here. Default, your database trace is active. Any other traces required, they can be activated as I shown you just now. And the respective files will be generated and will be shown here. Like as the database trace is active, every service is having a trace file. You observe, if you check index server is having a trace file. See, these loads, unloads are happening means there is a memory insufficiency. When the memory is not sufficient, load unloads happens. If these unloads are more frequently taking place, it leads to performance issues. This is the trace file. Expenses statements just now we configured. That is also there. That you'll be able to analyze. Old trace files, if you want to remove, the ideal way of doing it is just right click on that. You have option compress and then download and finally delete it if you don't need that trace file anymore. Because keeping the trace files here in this default path will lead to the space issues. Default trace path is this. So all the trace files will be here. USR SAP SID instance name / host name there. And you can merge these diagnosis files if you want. We have that facility. Deleting option anyhow is shown you that. And sometimes what happens is when your system is not responding, they may ask you to provide diagnosis information. SAP, if you're seeking support from SAP, they may ask you provide diagnosis information for the last 1 week. Or maybe they may ask you to provide RTA dumps or runtime environment dumps. So in such cases, you need to gather that information, provide to SAP. To do that, click on this diagnosis information. There is an option here, collect. And you can specify from date to date. Default you have for 7 days. The diagnosis information, this is for RTA dump files. And click on finish, it will gather that information for you. See on the right bottom corner is showing that it's collecting that information. So once that collection of information is completed, it will show you that in the history. And you can go to the history and download that. Still that is going on. The collection of information is over. Now click on diagnosis information history. So it's showing the history. Like you select and click on download collection, zip file will be created. And that file you can send it to SAP like this. And some of the situations where your system is not responding at all, then as I shown you earlier when we discussed about recovery, there is Python script files. You can use that Python script file with the name fullsysteminfo.dump, fullsysteminfo.dump.py. So that can be used at the operating system level. And there will be some emergency situations where your system is not responding. Then you select this HANA database. You can switch to diagnosis mode. To do that, click on this button, this one, administration, open diagnosis mode. It will take you to the diagnosis mode. So in the diagnosis mode, you can see the process, diagnosis files, and emergency information will show you the threads and all that. In case because of these threads are hanging, for that reason, if your database is not responding, in such cases you have an option to cancel the transactions here. Cancel all the transactions. Sometimes that may solve your problem. So they are given connections, transactions, threads, blocker transactions, everything. So a lot of options, there are a lot of facilities they're providing to you to troubleshoot the issues you come across. But as I told you, just follow those guidelines given to you in the document, troubleshooting and performance analysis guide. And utilize this more of HANA Cockpit now, because HANA Cockpit is giving all that informations to you. Whatever I shown you there, everything is available. Even if you want to see that diagnosis mode and all that, if you can go to offline activities, here see that troubleshooting on responsive system. If you click on that, so you need to provide that SID ADM details, then only you'll be able to access this. Let us go back and view those details. So click on the troubleshooting on responsive system. Now it will give you the same information, whatever I shown you in the diagnosis mode there. Connections, transactions, blocker transactions, threads. If you want to cancel any of the transactions, you'll be able to do it. It's taking a bit more time. Offline admin activities, anyhow, it will ask you to provide side DDM details because it will open a separate application where we have that starting, stopping, diagnosis files. Here also you can get the troubleshooting on responsive system. It's basically emergency information. Because they are locked there in HANA Studio. Or maybe the previous run what we have. So now it will show you everything here. Transactions, block of transactions, threads, every detail you have. So almost same thing. Whatever you find in your HANA Studio, you can find in this cockpit also. Expenses statements, plan cache, tables, usages, which table is more frequently accessed. That information you can see. Or you can also access your trace files and diagnosis files from here. View trace and diagnosis files. And this is something new which SAP has given to you, executing SQL. You can open SQL console and execute. Browsing database objects is also a new thing in 2.0. Catalog objects. These are not there earlier. So here you can find your database, you expand catalog and trace details you have. And there is a SQL console. If you click on open SQL console, you can write your SQL statements also. So that kind of flexibility we have. So Cockpit 2.0 is more advanced. So try to get used to this one. Here you can write your SQL statements. So another important feature what SAP has given from SPS 12 is workload classes. Purpose of workload classes is generally when you're creating users, there's a facility for you to specify some parameters. If you remember, every user will have some set of parameters, like you can give what we call email ID, you can give time zone, log on locally, and apart from that, couple of performance related parameters. One is priority and the statement memory limits. You can set the priority limits for these users. 0 is the lowest, 9 is the highest. So if you give more priority, when there is a waiting, the priority will be given to these user statements. So sometimes what happens is within the company, for a group of users, you want to do this. Like finance department, any transactions when they try to do in HANA database, you want to give more priority, high priority for the finance people. So that is not possible here directly because we don't have user group concept. In such cases, we can use these workload classes We can define a workload class and we can map the users to this workload class. At the workload class level, we set the properties. What we can set, we can give memory limit, we can give priority, and even thread limits also we can specify. So here these are the global parameters. Uh, global properties also you can change. User specific parameters also available in the right bottom corner. And if you look at this, here I created some workload classes. I'll show you how to create this workload class. So to create a workload class, let us go to this manage workload classes. Here click on create a new workload class. You can specify the name. I'm giving FICL execution priority. So you want to give the highest priority. Highest priority is 9. And then statement memory limit you can give, and thread limits also you can specify. Create. Now to this workload class we need to map the user. Select the workload class and create the mappings. So create mappings like this. Either application user or the application or database users or a particular client you can map. Entire application also you can map. Now automatically those settings will be applicable to that application or the users comes under this workload class. A lot of mappings you can create like this. See, these settings are applicable for both these users. Like that you can give group or users or a particular application. So that facility is also available. So this is something new which SAP has introduced from SPS Store. It was not there earlier. So like this, very useful options you have. Try to utilize them in the HANA cockpit for your monitoring. So in case if you have some issues and all that, as I mentioned, follow the document given to you and troubleshoot that. Performance issues you have, try to analyze it first of all, as I shown you how to analyze the memory, processing and all that. In case loading, unloading or the merging, if you need delta merge, if you want to perform manually, if it's not happening automatically, anyhow alerts will come. I shown you where you can set those alerts are. But if that's not happening, just go to the tables here. If you just right click on the table, there is an option perform delta merge manually. Loading, unloading also you can perform here. So as of now it's loaded into memory, that's why it's showing memory consumption here. Every table will be like that. Simple tables. Otherwise, just a minute. These are small tables. So here you can see the total memory consumption. I have 2451 KB. Main storage 1258, whereas delta we have 1194. If I perform a delta merge, so automatically that comes down here. The total memory usage also will come down because main memory is more compressible than delta. Nothing much changed here. It's already delta merge is done here. But if you have a table where data loading is continuously happening, there you can clearly observe that. 12 small tables. Anyhow, so if this table, if I'm not using at all, if you feel it's unnecessary to keep it in the memory, you can unload. And when it's unloaded, if someone try to access it, then that may lead to performance issues. Again, see no memory usages you have. And if you look at these columns also, it will show you loaded false. But if someone try to access this table now, it will lead to definitely performance issue because it has to load from the disk into memory. Like example, we know that it won't load everything into memory, only those columns we are accessing. Say I'm just trying to read only couple of columns of this table. And you see what is loaded into memory here. See, some of them is showing true, some of them is showing false. Reason only those columns which we are accessing will be loaded into memory, others are not loaded into memory. So that performance differences you can see clearly. And you want to load everything into memory manually also, you can do it. So everything loaded into memory, then you will get very high performance. But similarly, the memory usages also will be there. So whatever the parameters they are referring to, those parameters also always look at. That's also important. So preload column tables when you're doing system replications and all that. So that will give some performance improvements. So those you can consider some of these parameters. So preloading those tables in parallel. So consider these parameters also. So techniques, they'll give you what to do. And in your Dropbox, I also given one document for your housekeeping activities, defragmentations and all that if you want to do. So there are simple SQL statements we need to use for the table level. Reclaim log, if you can say, it will reclaim all those spaces left over in between. So that will give you some flexibility as far as the space is concerned. Those things also you should try. So overall, what I'm saying, trying to understand, it's about utilizing that information provided by SAP and try to identify the information, use that information, and troubleshoot the issues. This is a continuous process. Don't assume that today you read and do a couple of things, you'll be able to do this troubleshooting. But it's a continuous process. Even after 5 years, 6 years, also still you have to learn some new things. That may be happening for different reasons. But whatever I explained you related to this monitoring in last sessions, all it is important. Read those recipe notes, that mini checks what I've shown you, that you have to utilize. SQL statements given by SAP you need to utilize. Try all those things. Slowly you'll get into this.